Welcome to the Darkstream, Vox Day, voxday.net, and unauthorized.tv. Thanks for tuning in, and tonight we are going to focus on an epiphany of sorts that I had today, which was inspired by a discussion on Sigma Game. Now, I don't know how many of you who watch the dark streams follow Sigma Game, but it's actually grown quite a bit. In fact, it's got about 75% of the traffic of VP already, which is kind of remarkable when you consider that VP's been around since 2003 and Sigma Game's been around for like 9 months. But anyhow, it's obviously a topic that's of a lot of interest to people. Although it's been a little bit surprising that there hasn't been quite as much interest in the Sigma Game book on the crowdfund as I might have expected, but it's probably because it's kind of hidden under the hypergamo stuff. Anyhow, that may have been a suboptimal decision on my part, but c'est la vie. So, what was the epiphany? Well, we were discussing on the blog one of the more irritating responses of the more narcissistically inclined readers, which is to take and interpret every single discussion and every single analysis from the perspective of themselves. I mean, this is exactly the behavior that caused me to stop posting to Alpha Game several years ago. I found it very tedious to repeatedly have people discovering the socio-sexual hierarchy, getting intrigued by the various concepts, and immediately taking everything and trying to transform it into a topic that's all about themselves. All they wanted to do was ask me or somebody else, what am I? Or to tell other people what they thought they were on the basis of this observation, that observation, whatever. And I also noticed that a lot of people don't have much ability to comprehend even some of the most basic elements of the concepts. I'll give you an example. One reader, good guy, solid reader, I think his wife might read there too, but he actually asked me if I thought it was possible that someone was a Sigma on the basis of one thing that they said. Now, that's a category error. I know how it happened. I understand how it happened. The discussion was in the context of proposing different scenarios, and then, someone had proposed, actually on Social Galactic, someone had proposed a couple different scenarios. And so I suggested possible responses to both of those scenarios, typical responses from the various SSH ranks. In most circumstances, an alpha is going to respond differently to a given scenario than an omega. A bravo is often going to respond differently than a delta. But it's just one situation. There's a lot of reasons why people will behave in different ways than their general instinctive behavioral pattern would tend to suggest. One situation was an office environment. Well, what if the executive is your family member? You're going to behave differently towards them than if they're not. There's other variables at work in these proposed scenarios than just your SSH rank, right? And so the thing that's important to remember when you're discussing SSH, and specifically SSH ranks, is that they are behavioral patterns. And they are behavioral patterns that are established and that are exhibited over a period of years. And so to try to suggest that somebody is X because of one thing they said in one situation is not a reliable indicator or signifier in any way, shape, or form. Now, there's not that many ranks. You can guess, and you're going to be right at least 15% of the time. If you leave out the lower probability ones, you leave out omega, you're going to be right at least 25% of the time. If you just say delta every time, you're going to be right more than half the time. So the entire exercise of attempting to make a determination on the basis of a single response in a single scenario is obviously absurd. It's obviously retarded. And in practice, in reality, it's obviously narcissistic because, as in most circumstances, they are self-serving attempts to appeal to their own ego. I'll give you an example here. Let's abandon Kickstarter, and we'll go to Sigma. Go to Sigma Game. Okay. No, thank you. So here was today's post, and these were some of the responses that led to my epiphany. By this example, I'm 100% Sigma. When I first got together with my wife, she had a terrible temper and would throw all these insults and accusations and more. Within a year, I had completely broken her of these terrible emotional attacks. I was trained to not let herself become out of her mind emotionally angry. I got her to the point she would approach me and first tell me how she was emotionally upset and how completely illogical it was. Then she would either tell me directly what the real issue was or ask me to help her figure out what the real issue was. Her family was completely amazed I had tamed her often violent temper. As I cannot self-define what I am, I have no idea if others would see me as Sigma. It's nothing I worry about, but is an interesting thought. And then everyone clapped. Setting aside the fact that this does not sound entirely true, the focus on logic and the focus on talking about the real issues and all this sort of thing. I mean, this actually sounds initially very Delta. Now, the funny thing is, and I'll get to this, and this is partly what led to the epiphany, but we'll give you a couple more examples. I fit the Bravo category in both of these examples. Of course, that alone doesn't imply I'm a Bravo, but it's nice to know I definitely rise past the low, mid, Delta in situations like these. Again, the fact that you happen to fit what is in theory may be a typical answer from one behavioral pattern is not enough to establish that you fit that behavioral pattern, right? There's just a long wall of text about, I have notoriously not recognized higher up management at the office. The first instance was blah, 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 blah. Turned out that he didn't recognize his boss's boss. Blah, blah, blah. He was not even a little bit competent. The second was similar. I saw a man I did not know fixing the TV in the weight room. I asked if he was new in maintenance. He took it easier and immediately responded casually that he was district manager and was doing a favor for the other managers. I mean, honestly, guys, who cares? Who cares? And I put together this picture on AI to try to illustrate the point that the fact that you once whistled a song does not make you a bluebird. The fact that you once cut down a tree does not make you a beaver. And the fact that you went sailing a few times on the bay does not make you a buccaneer, let alone Blackbeard the pirate. You know, for some reason, certain people are absolutely obsessed with attempting to claim that they are a certain SSH rank. You know, back before I coined the term Sigma, back when the pickup artists were dividing everyone into alphas and betas, you know, everybody was an alpha. You know, one of the funniest things that I ever read was Eric S. Raymond, after he first encountered the binary sexual what do you call it, binary, he immediately explained how he's what the pickup artists call a natural alpha. And as evidence of this, when he goes to a restaurant, he often gets indicators of interest, or IOIs, as the PUAs, CALL them. I don't know what it is with their obsession with acronyms. But anyhow, waitresses gave him indications of interest. I didn't have the heart to, at the time, you know, I would occasionally comment on his blog. This is some time ago, obviously. But I didn't have the heart to say, you know, Eric, they just want to get a good tip. They're probably not interested in your, you know, small programmer ass. I mean, I could be wrong. I just doubt it. Blitzkrieg Bear says, I stayed home on Friday night and played Call of Duty, watched a little porn. I think I might be a Sigma. I mean, the point about being a Sigma that people always miss is that the non-social side, the doesn't play well with others side, is not necessarily totally dominant. You know, people mistake Sigmas for alphas. You know, Sigmas have a fair amount of that alpha charisma. There's 535 people who swore mindless obedience to me without me ever asking for it. That's why people confuse me with an alpha. You know. Also, this doesn't even bring in, it doesn't even address the sexual component. Look at me. Do I look like Chris Hemsworth, I think is his name, the handsome, tall, blonde guy? No. I'm not stunning. I'm not a stunningly attractive man, right? But my wife is absolutely beautiful. I have always, and you can talk to my old friends, etc., etc. They will tell you that I have always, starting in 11th grade, been involved with very beautiful women. Someone said something, in one of these proposed scenarios, I didn't address it, but someone else did. And they're talking about, well, what would the various SSH ranks response to their wife getting fat be? And, I don't remember what most of them were, but I do remember someone saying, Sigma wives don't get fat, which is, to the extent of my full range of data, is 100% true. But here's what's interesting, and is also true, is that to the full extent of my knowledge, Sigma ex-girlfriends don't get fat either. Practically every woman that I, have still been in, Facebook friends or Christmas cards or whatever, none of them are fat. And we're pushing, we're between 50 and 60 now. So, the idea that some, guy who's, dated a few girls who maybe are only 10 or 15 pounds overweight and have a cute smile and that sort of thing. I mean, first of all, good for you. That's good. If you're a average person of average attractiveness and you're dating an average woman, you're doing well. You're winning. That's not a bad thing. But you're also not the President of the United States. You're also not the captain of your college football team. This isn't that hard. And of course, as I always say, it's not supposed to be about you anyhow. Rogue Roman says, doing a Sigma thing doesn't make you a Sigma. Situational is not a pattern of behavior. Precisely. This is definitely something that is going to be at least a section of a chapter in the book. Now I have to write it. Now I have to write that section. Kajia says, how people cannot grasp the SSH is beyond me. Wonder if there's an IQ component or just self-delusion. It's self-delusion. I've seen plenty of smart people. Remember, the smarter that you are, the easier it is to rationalize, twist logic, etc., etc. Gammas tend to be smarter than the average. And they're the ones who concoct and inflate these delusion bubbles where they redefine words, they modify concepts solely in order to make themselves feel superior. And here's the irony, and keep this in mind whenever you hear people saying, well, Vox created this Sigma concept because he wants to feel like he's a special superior boy. How is concocting something that is clearly of lower status than the alpha trying to inflate myself or make myself feel better? Everybody assumed, believed, thought that I was an alpha, and I knew I wasn't. I understood the difference between me and the guys who are. The alphas get it. One of the biggest mega alphas I've ever met, the guy who radiated alpha energy more than anybody that I've ever personally met. And remember, I've met Donald Trump. I've met Henry Kissinger. I've met Guns N' Roses, David Lee Roth. Actually, David Lee Roth is up there. Dolph Lundgren. The kind of people that a lot of people would quite correctly assume are not only alphas, but pretty significant alphas, right? And I have to tell you, Chuck Bond was he was the founder of a company called ValueSoft. It was a distribution publisher company, and he sold it for like $100 million to GT Interactive, and was on the GT Interactive board. And Space Bunny and I met him and his newly acquired second wife, who was very pretty, and although not as pretty as Space Bunny, I will say. And the funny thing is, he's a big, powerful guy. Pretty good looking still. I mean, he was a bit older than me, I think. But it was funny because after we, he was one of those guys who said something about, said something about his like divorce and commented about how it was like the best 10 million he'd ever spent or something, some crack like that or something. And as we're walking away, Space Bunny said something like, well, it's not really a big surprise that he's divorced, right? And I said, I gotta tell you, he's one of the very few people I've ever met that just kind of made me feel this impulse to like roll over, expose my belly, and pee on myself. I mean, obviously I didn't, but that was the level of his. And it was funny because Space Bunny goes, I know. I mean, he just radiated that kind of alpha energy. Now, the funny thing was, so that was my instinctive reaction to him, right? So a few years later, we filed lawsuit against GT Interactive because they didn't pay us money that they owed us, and they were, not, basically they ended up going down. They were in the process of, they'd lost id Software, they'd had a lot of bombs, and so they were going downhill, and they were just trying to cut corners and save money wherever they could. And one of the things that they did do is they refused to pay us $100,000 that they owed us. So anyhow, we filed a lawsuit against them, and right before we went to court, they came and offered us a very good settlement, a lot more than we'd been than they'd owed us. They would have been better off if they just paid us in the first place. Anyhow, it was funny because I ran into Chuck Bond a few months later, because he was based in Minneapolis as well, and so we were talking, and he said, yeah, just so you know, I'm the reason we settled. And I said, well, thanks. And he said, yeah, they were a bunch of New York lawyers, and they were all talking big about how, you guys weren't really going to see it through and all this sort of thing. And he said, and I told him about the first time we met. And I said, yeah. He said, don't you remember? I said, well, yeah, we met in your offices, because I'd met him before that time I'm telling you about, when I met his wife and he met Space Bunny. And what had happened was I was wearing these prescription sunglasses. They're kind of cool, like these silver things, and titanium and all that sort of thing. Anyhow, we're sitting on the opposite ends of the table from each other with about like 8 other people. And he said, it really bothers me that I can't see your eyes. Would you take your glasses off? And I just said, no. I didn't explain why. He asked me a question. I gave him an answer. We move on. And he said, I remembered that, and I remembered, yeah, I just said, I told the rest of the board, look, I know this guy. They're not going to stop. They know what they're doing. We're probably going to lose. Like, they knew that they were going to lose if it went all the way. He's like, these guys are definitely going to go all the way. And so the interesting thing to me is that even though he's this, rich, physically big, successful mega alpha, he obviously viewed me as some form of alpha as well. He wouldn't even have the concept of sigma. It would mean nothing to him. But he knew that I was sufficiently akin to him that he needed to treat me with the relevant respect. He knew he couldn't bulldoze us. And this is the kind of thing that high status men do. Now, why? Well, because they can, because it's in their interest, because it's useful. It's very useful for me to know that a mega alpha like Chuck is almost certainly going to hit on my wife if he happens to get the opportunity. That's what people like him do. He might not, it's not like it's, he's absolutely going to. That's another issue that people have with the SSH. They don't get patterns of behavior. Doesn't mean that everybody does the same thing all the time, right? I'm going to disagree here with Skydog. He says you also have to be higher in the SSH to take advantage of SSH knowledge. I think that's totally untrue. I think that you have to be honest about the SSH to take advantage of it, but it is easier to take advantage of it for one simple reason. One of the main differentiators between high status and low status, and this is going to sound very strange to a lot of you, it's going to sound counterintuitive, but I believe that it is empathy. I believe that the higher status individuals are much more empathetic than lower status individuals. If you look at, I was talking to someone today who had I was mentioning this Epiphany, and he had some good insights on it. He said, yeah, if you look at the behavior of the very lowest status men, the omegas, they have no empathy whatsoever. They can't even recognize that the guy standing next to them does not want to smell somebody who hasn't taken a shower in 3 weeks. They can't recognize that no one wants to look at somebody who, hasn't brushed their hair and has green teeth with pieces of food lodged in the gaps. Nobody wants to see that. Nobody wants to be around. You can't even imagine that. No, Powers of Bear says masculine empathy versus feminine empathy. Perhaps no, that's not correct. There's no difference between qualities of empathy. The main difference is that women do not tend to have empathy. Women are sympathetic. They're not empathetic. But we'll deal with that another time. Blitzkrieg Bear says, or they don't care. No, it's not that they don't care. They don't have the ability to comprehend it. I don't care, but I know. I mean, for example, I know that the SFWA board doesn't like or approve of me. I am aware of that. I don't care that they don't. It makes no difference to me that they don't. But I know that they don't. Retro Dreamer keeps asking, does anyone know if there's an estimated release date for Vox? The book will probably come out mid-December. I'm hoping to make sure we at least get the ebooks out to everybody before Christmas. Rogue Roman says, I've always had an extreme fear of causing disgust in others. Is that a result of having been Omega? Possibly, but it's also possible that you just have insufficient empathy and you're sufficiently aware that you lack empathy that you worry about those things. If you're empathetic, you know you're not causing disgust in others. You know, I don't worry about causing disgust in others because I know what I'm doing and I know how they respond to it. You know, they might not approve. I mean, they might even be, you know, theoretically disgusted, like, you know, with my views on immigration or something. But I mean, obviously, the extent of my indifference is total and infinite in that regard. But seriously, if you look, you know, one of the things that led to this realization was the realization that alphas are more empathetic than deltas. That deltas are more narcissistic. Sam says, even the alpha's relentless pursuit of women is empathetic, since most women appreciate the attention from them. That's not what makes it empathetic, but that is correct. There's a great line from I think it was Royce. It might have been Roosh, or no, it was somebody else. It was back in the pickup artist era. And I just remember it was an alpha talking to a woman who was upset with him. And he was reframing the situation to better suit her feelings. And I remember the last line just because it made me laugh every time. Let's bring this dream home. Now, if you are going to understand what a woman wants, if you're going to understand what a woman feels, you have to have at least some degree of empathy in order to anticipate her. You know, the delta approach, which is, or worse, let's go with the gamma approach. The gamma approach has no empathy at all. You have to like me because I like you more than anyone else. That is absolutely anti-empathetic. It's making no attempt to understand how the other person might feel. It's making no attempt to even find out what their feelings are. It's an attempt to impose your own feelings on the other person. Think about how obnoxious that is. You have to like me just because I like you. You know? Now, as with most misguided philosophies, there's an element of truth in it, in that if somebody really likes you, that tends to make you like them a bit. And one of the things that I pointed out is, and this is where I was talking about, look, if you want to know if somebody's an alpha, or if you want to know if somebody's a sigma, look at the last 10 women that they dated before they got married, and don't just look at their wife, look at the predecessors. If they're all 8 to 10, you're dealing with an alpha or a sigma. If they're all over the place, it's unlikely. One of the things that was interesting was, people were talking about how attractive people tend to gather, the whole birds of a feather flock together thing, which I thought of because I was going through some old photos, and there's a picture of just some of the people that we used to hang out with when we lived in the Italian region, and it struck me that the people, we had moved to a new country. We didn't speak the language initially, and yet within a year, the people that we were associating with tended to be intelligent, successful guys and their beautiful wives. It was kind of funny because the Minnesota Bible study that was kind of our main social group was, it was, the women were really pretty. Granted, you're dealing with a bunch of Scandinavians and stuff. So, if I showed you a picture, you'd probably laugh. I think the average height of the women was like 5'8". Super nice people. These were like some of the nicest people I've ever known in my entire life. But they were very physically attractive. And, then the people that we were hanging out with in the Italian part were very similar, if not, in some cases, even more exceptional. There was this Dutch woman who was the mother of my friend who joined my soccer team with me, and for about a 2-year period, we were practically he and I were practically attached to the hip, literally, because he always insisted on driving to the soccer games. He was a very, very wealthy guy, and his girlfriend is probably one of the 2 most physically beautiful people I've ever seen in my entire life. And it was kind of funny because she and Space Bunny really hit it off because they had a mutual interest in donkeys, of all things. Anyhow, girls and their equines. But the thing is that if that element isn't there, then you're not dealing with high status. You can imitate it all you like, you can act like all you like, but is it real? Sure, if you're, obviously you can have a celibate alpha monk. It's just harder to tell. But you don't have a alpha involuntary celibate. That's just a loser. And no matter what you call it, remember, the labels don't matter. It's a taxonomy. We're naming observable patterns of behavior that are already there. To go back to my earlier point, I kind of forgot to get there. Like I said, people sometimes say, well, you don't look like much. I don't see it. Exactly. That's the whole point. think about if you see a guy who is not that impressive to you, but he's clearly a mega alpha or a sigma or something, that's your cue to be careful. That's your cue that you're dealing with somebody who has exceptional game. You know, think about how Tommy from Peaky Blinders. He's considered to be, the premier Hollywood sigma, right? And people are always overestimating him. Or sorry, they're always underestimating him, presumably because he's physically small or because he's part gypsy or whatever. And that always turns out to be a mistake. Do you think it's an accident that I get customarily underestimated? You don't think Indiegogo considers that they probably underestimated me? And that's, like I said, you don't need to be high on the SSH to use it to your own advantage. If I see a guy who doesn't look like much, doesn't seem to have any particular wealth or influence, and he's, got hot Latinas or whatever draped over him and stuff, I'm going to be very, very cautious, because there's something going on that I don't know. Maybe it's a situation like Prince. When you would see Prince out and about in Minneapolis back in the day, sometimes he'd have beautiful girls draped all over him. Sometimes he would seemingly be by himself, except for the two giant bodyguards who would always be within sight. But the point is that if you just saw him and you didn't know he was Prince, he didn't look like much, right? But he's Prince. I mean, he was literally the cultural king of Minneapolis. The internet claims Patrick Bateman from American Psycho is Sigma, but he's the portrait gamma. Yeah, I mean, Bateman is delusional. Bateman is absolutely obsessed with status. Bateman cares so much about what other people think that he's willing to kill them. Also, consider the source. Do you really think the author knows anything about that? Blitzkrieg Bear says, except he gets good-looking women. Weird, I don't know. He doesn't get good-looking women. They don't exist. It's a movie. It's a book written by a gay guy. Yeah, James Bond is the proper movie Sigma. Anytime I look into Prince, I get a newfound respect for him. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I regret, even though I met him I don't know, 6 times, probably talked to him 4 times, but I regret never having bothered going to one of his concerts. It never seemed necessary. I never bought any of his albums because I didn't have to hear him all the time. But it was funny, reading some of the stories about him were amusing because number one, he was such a Minnesotan. I mean, he went to North High, which is the closest public school to my school. Minnehaha Academy and Minneapolis North used to play each other in a lot of sports and all that sort of thing. And he was a pretty good basketball player despite his height, which is another interesting thing. Um, but what was funny was he had some friends out from California. It was a very cold winter. In fact, I can probably guess which winter it might have been. But he went to Best Buy and parked his Cadillac and just left it running. And they went in, and his friend said, you know, you left the car running, and it's not going to be here when we come back. And Prince just laughed at him and said, "Yeah, it will. It's Minnesota. You know, no one's going to steal your running car in the middle of winter. Just no one will. Not going to happen." And of course, he was right. His friend was astonished when they came out, and the car's still sitting there running. Nobody's touched it. The other funny thing, as a musician, the thing that I thought was hilarious was he'd hired a new keyboardist for his live band, and they were at the first practice, and the musician said he was really nervous, but he was really focusing hard, trying to really pay attention. And Prince went over to him and said, "Are you a musical genius?" And the keyboardist says, No, Prince, I'm not." He said, "Well, then you better write down the songs because you're not going to remember them." He's like, "I don't write them down because I'm a musical genius." And it's always funny to me when people say, "Well, smart people don't say that they're smart. Talented people don't say that they're talented." And you always know that anyone who says that is neither smart nor talented. If you're smart, you know it. If you're talented, you know it. The whole idea of, you're beautiful because you don't know you're beautiful. I mean, that's Hollywood bullshit. That's pure gamma bullshit. Believe me, Shaquille O'Neal knows he's tall, and he will not only tell you he's tall, he will laugh at you for being small. Anyone who is highly intelligent not only knows they're highly intelligent, they are biting their tongue all the time to not tell you that you're a retard. Yeah. Sam says, every famous tall comedian starts his set by addressing his height. Comedians always start their sets by addressing something. Like Simon Evans, the really funny English comedian, he always begins by pointing out the fact that, yes, he's got these like really, really tiny eyes that, it looks like he's born without eyes. He doesn't even look like he's squinting. He literally looks like he doesn't have eyes at all. You find it difficult to imagine he can actually see. Owen and I were talking about my doing a comedy set sometime. I'd written some jokes, and none of them apparently are as funny as my wife's jokes. A lot of people don't realize this, but Owen does occasionally steal jokes from my wife. And she actually refers to him as the joke thief. But anyhow, it was funny because I sent him a few jokes, and he said, "I can tell from the structure that they would be funny if I knew what you were talking about." So we thought it'd be kind of funny to do a whole set of coming at it from the perspective of being too intelligent for the audience and having to explain everything to them, and how that could be funny. Like explaining, well, what kind of routine you're thinking about developing, and how, I've been watching a lot of female comics, and I don't think that that's a strategy for me, because I don't know how unless I can talk about a non-existent vagina, I don't know how I'll be able to tell any jokes, because, that represents exactly 72.4% of all female comedian jokes is references to their genitals. So we had this whole thing. And like Owen said, he said he really wanted to see it because either it would work and be really funny, or alternatively, it would bomb so badly and so comprehensively that would be funny in its own right. So here's another little bit about second generation warfare. Yeah. Anyhow, I don't know if that'll ever happen. If Owen ever does a European tour or a European special, maybe I'll be one of his opening acts. That would be an interesting challenge, because perfectly well, I'm not even remotely afraid to go up there and completely bomb for 20 minutes or whatever. It doesn't make me angry that people don't find my humor to be funny. I've always insisted that I'm wildly and woefully unappreciated, that my humor is wildly unappreciated. But there's like 6 people who get it and think it's funny. But that's enough. What more do you need? Anyhow, what SSH type would fire a struggling male employee the quickest now, adding empathy? Totally depends upon the situation. Probably Bravo. Bravos are a little bit emotional about the rules, and they're the ones who tend to crack down on people the hardest. I mean, you can see it, for example, look at the difference between the way that Owen reacts to somebody being a pain in the ass and me. I just get rid of them and I never think about it again. Owen works himself up into anger and starts ranting about burning the deadwood. I mean, it's kind of funny how they just take such personal offense to the rules being broken. I like Bravos a lot. I think Bravos tend to be, in some ways, the most fortunate members of the most fortunate SSH rank. Everybody likes them. Everybody respects them. They don't really have a whole lot of pressure on them. They don't have to even work to meet hot women, because they just date the alphas hand-me-downs. It's not a bad situation at all. They often they're always closest to the sun, in terms of being with the alphas. You've seen that Malhari video, right? And you can see everybody wants to be around the alpha, but the Bravos, the 4 Bravos that are 5, the Bravos that are around him, you can see their pride in their closeness to the alpha. It's obviously a very self-satisfying position to be in. obviously being a sigma and having alphas all react negatively to you, uh, I don't have the Bravo experience at all. But looking at it from a distance, from afar, it actually looks pretty good. You know, it looks pretty reasonable. So, anyhow, if I gave one piece of advice to lower status men in general, you know, with the gammas, you're like, you know, work on being more honest with yourself and others. But to lower status men in general, omegas, deltas, gammas too, work on your empathy. Stop thinking about how is he thinking about me. That's not empathy. You're still thinking about yourself. Try to think about what he is actually thinking about. Try to think about what she is actually thinking about, what she actually feels. And when you start doing that, you begin to, your behavior will naturally begin to gravitate more towards the behavior of higher status men. You know, the whole thing about, I mean, here's the thing. We talk about sigma indifference, right? The funny thing is, I probably say I don't care less than most people do. I do quite the opposite. Because I am naturally indifferent, I'm often going out of my way to reassure people that I am paying attention, that I'm not ignoring their wants, their needs, etc., etc. If you find yourself telling people that I don't care, first of all, chances are pretty good you probably do. Chances are pretty good you're not telling the truth exactly. But also, nobody asked you. If somebody hasn't specifically asked you, do you care? Then don't let the words I don't care pass your lips. You know, there's a weird thing that women and gammas do, is that they'll literally tell an entire story, and then she did this, and then she did that, and that, and the whole point of the story is say, and this, but I didn't care. You know, and my first thought is, that's a really bad story. I mean, I could literally tell a million stories about things I don't care about. There was a flood in Valencia. It rained for 40 days and 40 nights. And because the ground is hard, it didn't absorb the water. And that caused the canyons to, you know, the rivulets to turn into dry canyons to turn into rivers. And it created this flood, and it washed out this house, and a cat drowned. And I didn't care. I mean, it's like the infinite set of stories ending in that punchline, right? Terrible stories. But again, why if you're going to devote 10 minutes to telling a story about how you don't care, I think you probably do, you know? Sam Perchansky says, Gamma cares what others think, but doesn't know. Omega doesn't care and doesn't know. Probably. I don't know. I don't know, but the important thing is that, you know, hone your empathy, refine your empathy. It's not sympathy. Remember, there's a difference. Empathy is knowing what others think and feel. Sympathy is genuinely caring about what other people think and feel, but it doesn't mean you know what it is. And then solipsism is having absolutely no concern whatsoever for what other people think and feel. You know, remember, and this is what's interesting. How could you could say, well, how come sociopaths, how can they become alphas? How come they often manage to pass for alphas? They manage to do well with women and that sort of thing. Often they manage to do well in corporate environments. Because narcissists have no empathy, but they study people. They simulate empathy. They don't have it, but they manage to simulate it well enough. So sympathy is focused on the effect versus the cause? Yes. You know, if you're sympathetic, then you'll ask the person, how are you feeling? If you're empathetic, you don't have to ask. You know, honestly, I am a highly empathetic person. My mother had me tested. You know, I'm not a dark triad personality. I'm a dark biad personality. Which, by the way, it's probably not a surprise that my psych profile is a little bit unusual. But basically, I'm high in narcissism. I'm high in Machiavellianism. I'm also very high in empathy. Dark triad is usually high in all three. And so, and so the thing is that when you, you know, for example, the sympathetic person sees somebody is upset and says, "Oh, I see you're upset. What's wrong?" If you're empathetic, you know that you know that they're sad because you know they lost their cat or something. You know, how is solipsism different than narcissism? Narcissism, solipsism is unaware of others. Narcissism is taking advantage of others. Narcissism is fundamental. I mean, it can be very predatory. You're totally focused on yourself at the expense of others. That's more malignant narcissism, to be honest. But I mean, solipsism is just has no even recognition that there's any other possible position. SJWs think empathy is believing everyone. It is not. It is understanding them despite what they say. That's one way to put it, yeah. So, I mean, empathy is better for solutions, and yeah, much better. I mean, that's why alphas, I believe that empathy is probably the source of alpha charisma. You know, that's why they have the ability to bring people into their vision. Sapien Avenger says empathy and Machiavellianism is a good combination. Yeah, I've personally found it very effective. It's incredibly useful to understand what your enemy is thinking. I mean, Sun Tzu literally advises empathy. If you know yourself and you know your enemy, you will never be defeated in battle. You know, Socrates only got half of Sun Tzu's message. He said, "Know yourself." Knowing yourself is good. Milo might have that rare combo too. That's an interesting thought. I don't know. I don't know. Um, in fact, it might be the lack of empathy that's part of his problem. Um, the Rogue Roman. I understand how you feel, and I don't care. Sorry. Yes, actually, that pretty much summarizes, um, how my general approach to things. I mean, and just so you understand, people don't tend to get that. They seem to think that if you don't care, you must not pay attention. I mean, I've mentioned this before. My mother realized, somewhat to her horror, when I was 32, that I had actually been paying attention all those years. And the reason that she realized it was she read my second book, The World in Shadow. And she recognized, my mother's also quite intelligent. In fact, I think my mother was actually higher IQ than my father. Um, but she recognized some people that characters are based on, and realized that I had been paying much, much closer attention than she'd ever imagined because of the indifference that she observed. You know, um, but empathy is a very, very powerful tool. I think it's a very, very important skill to have. And the good news is that according to scientists, empathy can be improved. So, if you want to improve your social status, if you want to improve the way that people perceive you, I highly recommend working on improving your empathy. You know, and it's not that difficult to work on. Take two people tomorrow and study them a little bit. I mean, obviously in a non-creepy way. And then go and talk to them and see if, just say, it looks like you're feeling a little bit happy today. Are you having a good day? And if they're like, yeah, I got 12 hours of sleep last night and I feel great. You pass the test. You know, hey, you seem a little worried about something. What are you worried about? And it's funny because, of course, um, you know, as my kids often tell me, um, my advice often sounds incredibly sociopathic, but it really isn't. Do you think writing developing characters helps with empathy, or is it a chicken or the egg situation? I think it's the other way around. I think empathy helps you write better characters. I mean, do you think it's an accident that the female characters that I write are generally considered pretty well written for a guy? You know? Silent Draco gets it. You're paying attention, but no one realizes that they're data. Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's all data. It's always been data. How is that a problem? Sapien Avenger says, my parents were in the medical field. You need to have empathy, but not freak out to be able to help. Well, that's what's interesting, because one of the things that I read is that working in the medical field actually tends to train the empathy out of you. People tend to become less empathetic over time in the medical field, probably for that reason, because they need to be able to, most people, if they can understand, if they have an empathetic connection, uh, it causes an emotional connection. That's where the combination of high empathy and narcissism, I think, can help. So then a female author writing good male characters must be even more rare. Precisely. And I think that's generally true. You know, I mean, female authors tend to write nothing but, alphas. He's a really sexy werewolf, and he's a really sexy vampire. They both love me. How shall I choose? That's like the plot of every romance novel ever. He's a sexy pirate, and he's a sexy businessman. How will I choose? It's the same frickin' thing every time. How often are alphas conflict avoidant? They're not. No, they're not. They're not generally conflict avoidant. Alphas are very pro-conflict. They come right at you. So then, is How to Win Friends and Influence People all bullshit? I wouldn't know. I've never read it, but I always assumed it was. Seems like a moderate degree of psychopathy mixed with high conscientiousness would make for a good surgeon. I would think so, yes. So, anyhow, I've got some things to do before I turn in, so I should probably let you all go. But I'm glad that this, it seems like this epiphany about empathy may have struck a chord. Maybe we're onto something. I think it deserves further exploration. For those of you on DLive, if you haven't subscribed to Unauthorized yet, I absolutely encourage you to do so. We've got some new stuff coming. We're also going to be launching subscriptions soon for Fandom Pulse, which you're definitely going to want to subscribe to. And we're at about 40% of where we would really like to be. So we're down about 50% from before the whole debacle. So hopefully we can get everybody to come back over the next couple months. In any event, have a good evening on Vox Day, and you need to be more empathetic. This is the Darkstream.